Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at just one source, a YouTube video from Senator Bernie Sanders called "We Are Living in Unprecedented Times." And, it's so easy to feel overwhelmed by everything that's going on, especially in the political landscape.
Right.
But that's what we're here for, right?
Exactly.
So to unpack Sanders' perspective and really try to figure out what he's saying.
Yeah.
And I think he makes a pretty bold claim right off the bat.
Yeah.
Saying that Trump's second term marks this dangerous turn towards oligarchy and authoritarianism in America. So is this just political hype, or is there really something more to it?
Well, it's certainly attention grabbing, I'll say. That Sanders lays out his argument pretty clearly.
Okay.
He believes that America is moving towards a system where a small group of incredibly wealthy individuals hold all the power and then use it to benefit themselves, potentially at the expense of everyone else.
Right.
And he calls this trend towards oligarchy and even suggests as kind of paving the way for authoritarianism.
Okay, so those are some pretty loaded terms.
Yeah.
All right.
Sure.
Can you break it down for our listener?
Yeah.
What does this actually look like in practice?
So imagine a society where a handful of people control most of the wealth and resources. These individuals, because they have so much money, have an outsized influence on government decisions.
Right.
This influence, can translate into policies that favor their interests.
Okay.
Potentially leading to things like tax cuts for the wealthy, while social programs for the less fortunate get cut back.
Right.
Sanders even paints this picture of Trump being inaugurated with Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Mark Zuckerberg right there behind him.
Right.
These three men became over $2 billion richer.
Wow.
Since Trump's election.
$2 billion.
Yeah.
That's a staggering amount of money.
It's an incredible amount.
Yeah, and I can see how that kind of wealth could easily translate into political power.
Absolutely. Sanders goes on to say that those three individuals now hold almost $1 trillion.
Wow.
Which he claims is more than the combined wealth of the entire bottom half of American society.
Yeah.
Just let that visual sink in for a second.
Wow.
Just three people
Yeah.
holding more wealth than millions and millions of others combined.
Yeah, that image is hard to shake.
It's pretty jarring.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder about the potential consequences.
For sure.
Right. If a tiny fraction of the population controls that much wealth, what does that mean for everyone else?
Right.
Does it mean our voices are drowned out, that our needs and concerns are ignored?
Those are some of the questions that Sanders is raising.
Yeah.
And to understand the full scope of his argument, we also need to consider his concerns about authoritarianism as well. Essentially, he's suggesting that this concentration of wealth in the hands of a few could erode democratic norms and pave the way for a system where individual rights are suppressed.
So it's not just about economic inequality, but also about the potential loss of freedom.
That's right. And democratic principles.
Yeah.
And to illustrate this point, Sanders points to a few key examples from Trump's second term.
Okay.
He talks about Trump's attempt to suspend all federal grants and loans, which would have had a devastating impact on vulnerable populations who rely on programs like Medicaid, food stamps, and veteran support.
That's a pretty drastic move.
Yeah.
Could you tell our listener a little more about what happened there?
So Trump actually issued an executive order to freeze this funding, arguing that it was necessary to cut government spending. However, critics saw this as a blatant attempt to use executive power to bypass Congress and advance his own agenda. It raised serious concerns about the potential for authoritarian overreach, especially when you consider the impact it would have had on millions of Americans who depend on these programs.
So this wasn't just an idea or a proposal.
Right.
He actually took concrete steps to make it happen.
Yes. And while the order was ultimately blocked by the courts, it demonstrates a willingness to disregard democratic norms and potentially harm some of the most vulnerable members of society.
It's definitely unsettling
to
think about the potential consequences of those actions.
For sure.
And it's not just about social programs.
Right.
Sanders also brings up Trump's attacks on the media.
Yes.
Specifically going after outlets like ADC, CBS, Meta, and even the Des Moines Register with lawsuits.
Right. And this is where Sanders argues that the erosion of First Amendment rights comes into play.
Yeah.
He's suggesting that if journalists are afraid to report critically on those in power for fear of, legal repercussions,
right,
it undermines the very foundation of a free press,
right,
which is essential for holding leaders accountable.
That makes sense, because if the media can't freely report on what's happening, how can we as citizens stay informed and make informed decisions?
Exactly.
Feels like we're losing a vital check on power.
And it's important to note that Sanders doesn't explicitly name any specific countries or dive into like a deep historical analysis here.
Right.
But he is drawing parallels to the tactics employed by authoritarian regimes throughout history, targeting the media, attempting to silence dissent, and concentrating power.
Right.
These are all warning signs that we can't afford to ignore.
It's a lot to take in, and it does paint a pretty bleak picture.
It does.
But I'm curious, does Sanders offer any solutions? Or are we just supposed to sit here and worry?
Well, that's where things get a bit more hopeful.
Okay.
Sanders doesn't just leave us with this image of impending doom.
Okay.
He actually believes we can fight back, even with Republicans controlling both the House and the Senate.
Really? How is that even possible with the current political landscape?
He points out that Republicans hold slim majorities, particularly in the House, where a 4-vote margin leaves them vulnerable on certain issues.
So there's still room for debate.
Exactly.
And potential to influence decisions.
That's where Sanders' call to action comes in.
Okay.
He urges everyone to call and email their representatives to voice their opposition to legislation that they find harmful.
Right.
He even provides the Capitol switchboard number.
Oh, wow.
202-224-2131.
Okay, so write that down, everyone.
So if you're feeling fired up about any of this,
right,
grab your phone, make your voice heard.
I love that he's giving people concrete steps to take.
Yeah.
It's empowering to know that we can still make a difference.
Absolutely.
He also highlights one specific piece of legislation that's a key battleground right now, the budget reconciliation bill.
Yes, and this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Especially for you.
Okay.
This bill proposes massive tax cuts for the wealthy.
Okay.
And to pay for those cuts, it slashes programs like Medicaid. That provides support to working families and low-income individuals.
So basically taking from those who need it most to benefit those at the top.
That's one way to look at it.
What kind of impact would that have on everyday people?
Well, it could mean cuts to healthcare education.
Wow.
And other essential services that many rely on.
Yeah.
Sanders sees this budget bill as a prime example of the kind of policies that exacerbate income inequality and benefit the ultra-wealthy at the expense of everyone else.
Right.
He considers it a microcosm of the larger fight against oligarchy and the erosion of social safety nets.
It's a stark contrast, for sure.
It is.
On one hand, you have the potential for policies that could further concentrate wealth and power. And on the other, you have people struggling to make ends meet and losing access to vital services.
Right.
So what can we do about it?
Well, Sanders believes that making your voice heard through calls and emails is a crucial first step.
Yep.
Especially when it comes to something like this budget bill, where those slim Republican majorities could be swayed.
So short term, it's about making our voices heard.
Yes.
And pushing back against harmful legislation like this budget bill.
Exactly.
But what about the long game?
Yeah.
What's Sanders' vision for lasting change?
That's where his concept of building a movement comes in.
Okay.
He's not just talking about winning a few political battles here and there.
Okay.
He wants to create a sustained force for progressive change.
Right.
That can fundamentally shift the balance of power in this country.
That sounds like a pretty ambitious goal.
It is ambitious.
What does that look like in practice?
He talks about rallying people around a shared set of values and policies that address the root causes of the problems we're facing.
Right.
And he emphasizes that many of these policies already enjoy broad public support.
Okay, so give us some examples.
Yeah.
What kind of policies is he talking about?
He's talking about things like Medicare for all, ensuring a living wage for everyone, making sure people have access to affordable housing, and addressing the climate crisis.
Okay.
These are all issues that polls show resonate with a lot of Americans, regardless of political party.
So he's saying by finding common ground on these issues that affect us all, we can build a movement powerful enough to actually create change.
Exactly. He believes that if enough people come together and demand action, it can overcome the influence of wealthy special interests and lead to real, lasting change.
It's a hopeful vision, but I have to admit, it also feels pretty daunting.
Yeah.
We were talking about fundamentally transforming the way power operates in this country where do we even begin?
It's definitely a big challenge.
Yeah.
And Sanders doesn't shy away from that.
Yep.
He acknowledges it'll take sustained effort, strategic organizing, and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
Right.
But he also points out that throughout history, movements for social justice have achieved what seemed impossible. Look at the civil rights movement, the women's suffrage movement, the fight for LGBTQ plus equality.
Right.
Those were all long, hard-fought battles, but they ultimately succeeded because people believed in a better future and were willing to fight for it.
So you're saying even though things might seem bleak right now, there's still reason to be hopeful that we shouldn't just give in to despair and cynicism.
Absolutely. And remember, even small actions can make a difference.
Okay.
Every phone call you make to your representative, every email you send, every conversation you have about these issues contributes to a larger movement for change.
That's a good point. It's easy to feel powerless when you're up against these huge forces like wealthy elites, entrenched political systems, and media manipulation. But Sanders is reminding us that we're not powerless. We have a voice, and we have a responsibility to use it.
Exactly. And that leads us to the question Sanders poses at the end of his video: what role do you want to play in shaping the future of this country?
It's a powerful question. It really makes you stop and think about what kind of future you want to see and what you're willing to do to help create it.
And what I find interesting is that Sanders isn't just offering a critique of the current system.
Okay.
He's also presenting an alternative vision.
Right.
A vision of a society where everyone's needs are met, where everyone has access to quality health care, affordable housing, a living wage, and a healthy environment.
It's a vision that resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah.
But how do we get there? The political landscape right now feels so polarized. How do we bridge those divides and find common ground?
That's the real work, isn't it? And it requires empathy, open-mindedness, and a willingness to have tough conversations.
Right.
It also means understanding that these issues are complex and there aren't always easy answers.
So what can we do as individuals to foster more productive dialogue and start working towards solutions? It's easy to get caught up in outrage and feel like we're just shouting into the void.
One of the most important things we can do is listen to each other. Really listen with the intention of understanding, not just waiting for our turn to speak.
Okay.
We also need to be open to having our own assumptions challenged and considering different perspectives.
That's not always easy, especially with social media algorithms often reinforcing our existing biases and creating echo chambers.
It takes effort to break out of those echo chambers, but it's essential if we want to have meaningful conversations and find common ground.
Yeah.
And it's not just about talking to people who agree with us.
Right.
It's about reaching out to those who hold different views and looking for points of connection.
So maybe instead of unfriending or blocking everyone we disagree with online, we should try to engage in respectful dialogue, even if it's uncomfortable.
Exactly. Disagreement doesn't have to be destructive. It can actually be incredibly productive if we approach it with an open mind and a willingness to learn from each other. You might even find that you have more in common than you thought.
And that's where real change begins, right? When we can move beyond polarization and demonization and start working together to build a more just and equitable world.
That's what we can hope for.
Yeah.
I think Sanders' message is ultimately one of hope, a reminder that even facing huge challenges, we have the power to shape our own future.
Right.
It's a call to action for each of us to step up and engage in the process of democracy and fight for the kind of world we want to live in.
Well said. This has been a really thought-provoking deep dive. Hopefully you're leaving with a better understanding of the challenges we face, the potential solutions, and most importantly, the power you have to make a difference.
I agree. And if there's one thing I hope you take away from this, it's this: never underestimate your own ability to create positive change. Even small actions can ripple outwards and have a big impact. So don't be afraid to speak up, to get involved, and to fight for what you believe in.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.